In this video, we're going to go over the history of Commodore's Amiga CD32 and dive deeper into yet another forgotten piece of technology that defined the console wars.
The world's first 32-bit game machine.
It's got the best games and it's twice as fast as any other console.
Graphics power with the mighty 68020 microprocessor and CD stereo sound, and the possibilities are limitless.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore's keeping up with you.
Our world would never be the same again.
The Amiga CD32 emerged during a pivotal transition in gaming history, marking the shift from 16-bit to 32-bit technology and arriving at the dawn of the CD-ROM revolution. Launched in 1993 as Commodore's last desperate gambit to save a once mighty computing empire, this gray box would become both a technological milestone and a tragic footnote in gaming history. A console with impressive capabilities that was doomed by corporate mismanagement and brutal market timing. The story of the CD32 begins not with the console itself, but with Commodore International, a company that dominated the home computing landscape throughout the 1980s. Founded in 1954 as a typewriter repair operation by Jack Tramiel, Commodore evolved into a calculator manufacturer in the late 1960s before pivoting to computers in the 70s. By 1982, the company had released what would become the world's best-selling computer, the Commodore 64, which sold approximately 22 million units during its lifetime. Commodore's trajectory was impressive. The company released its first home computer, the Commodore PET, in 1977, followed by the VIC-20, the first computer to reach 1 million units sold. The release of the C64 in 1982 cemented their position in the industry, with sales peaking in the last quarter of 1983 at $49 million, equivalent to $126 million now. At one point in the 1980s, Commodore was the world's largest company in the home computer industry. However, an internal power struggle led to co-founder Jack Tramiel's resignation in January 1984. Tramiel's departure at the height of Commodore's financial success shocked the industry, especially when he founded a new company, Tramiel Technology, and hired several former Commodore engineers. By July 1984, Tramiel had acquired Atari's consumer division from Warner Communications and began developing competing products. Without Tramiel's leadership, Commodore sought new directions. In August 1984, they purchased a small startup called Amiga Corporation for $25 million, which became a subsidiary renamed Commodore Amiga, Inc. In 1985, Commodore launched the Amiga 1000 personal computer, running on Amiga OS with a full-color graphical interface and preemptive multitasking, features that made it popular for computer games and creative software. The Amiga line proved particularly successful in European markets. In West Germany, Commodore machines were virtually ubiquitous by 1989. However, by the late 1980s, the company's position began to decline due to internal conflicts and mismanagement. While the Amiga series remained popular, newer models struggled to keep pace against competing IBM PC compatibles and Apple Macintosh systems. Commodore's first attempt to enter the console market came in December 1990 with the Commodore 64 game system. Essentially a Commodore 64 computer in console form, it was only released in Europe. Commodore overhyped the system, promising 100 games within 2 months of release, but only 28 games were ever released for it. With the C64 computer selling for about the same price and offering more functionality, the console failed to gain traction, selling only about 20,000 units. Despite this failure, Commodore launched the CD-TV, Commodore Dynamic Total Vision, in March 1991. This multimedia entertainment system was basically an Amiga 500 computer with a CD drive, remote control, and a high-end luxury marketing approach. Priced at a steep £699 in the UK and $1,000 in the US, the CD-TV targeted Amiga computer owners, but found few takers. Why would someone buy an entirely new system when they could simply wait for a CD drive to be released for their existing Amiga? Only around 35 games were developed for the system, which sold fewer than 30,000 units worldwide before being discontinued in 1993. By early 1993, Commodore International was in dire financial straits, posting losses of $177.6 million, 6 times the size of their profits from the previous financial year. After 4 consecutive years of mismanagement, the company had accumulated a total loss of $356.5 million over the previous 3 years. It was against this backdrop of financial peril that the Amiga CD32 was conceived. Announced at the Science Museum in London on July 16, 1993, with British TV personality Chris Evans presiding, the CD32 was described by David Pleasance, Commodore UK's general manager, as a make-or-break machine for the company. The system was released on September 16, 1993, for £299 in the UK, bundled with 2 games, Diggers and Oscar. The CD32 was marketed as the world's first 32-bit home games console, though this claim wasn't entirely accurate. Japan's FM Towns Marty had beaten it to market by 7 months. However, the CD32 was indeed the first such system available in Western markets. Technically, the Amiga CD32 was based on Commodore's AGA chipset, with specifications similar to the Amiga 1200 computer. Under the hood, it featured a Motorola 68 EC020 processor running at 14.32 MHz NTSC, or 14.18 MHz PAL, 2 MB of Amiga chip RAM, and 1 MB of Kickstart ROM containing CD32 firmware. The system also included 1 KB of non-volatile EEPROM memory for game saves, a pitifully small amount that allowed saving progress in only 1 game at a time. The console's graphics capabilities were impressive for the era, with a 24-bit color palette, 16.8 million colors. It supported resolutions ranging from 320 by 200 to 1280 by 400 for NTSC regions and 320 by 256 to 1280 by 512 for PAL regions. Audio was delivered through 4x 8-bit PCM channels with a 28 kHz maximum DMA sampling rate. The CD32's design kinda resembled the Genesis, a dark granite gray box with a large top-loading double-speed CD-ROM drive as its centerpiece. The design had some quirks that reflected its rushed development. The controller ports were located on the left side of the console rather than the front, with port 1 positioned further back than port 2. The power switch was inconveniently placed at the rear of the machine. The CD32 controller design was unique comparing it to its competitors, not in a good way though. The radical upside-down design featured a somewhat wobbly cheap D-pad prone to breaking after prolonged use, along with multiple buttons including a main button labeled 1, 2, 3, which acted as all 3 fire buttons for games designed for single-button joysticks. Other buttons on the pad were clearly labeled with CD player control icons for skip, play, stop, and pause functions. Commodore predicted 250,000 sales across Europe by Christmas 1993 and claimed 77 games would be available by the end of that year. In reality, only about 50,000 units were sold by year's end, and just 21 games were released by Christmas, a far cry from the miracle number the company needed to save its business. During the first 3 months of the CD32's release, Commodore posted a loss of $8.2 million. Despite these disappointments, the CD32 performed respectably in the UK market. For a brief period in spring 1994, CD32 games outsold PC CD-ROMs and Mega CD titles, with Amiga CD32 games making up 55% of all CD-ROM sales. Games were typically priced at £30, with some budget titles available for £20. There were 4 different retail packages for the CD32 during its short life. The original release bundled Oscar and Diggers, followed by the Dangerous Streets bundle in November 1993 with 4 games. The Spectacular Voyage bundle arrived in March 1994, dropping the price to £250 and including 6 games. The final Critical Zone bundle was released in October 1994 at £230 with 7 games. The CD32 faced stiff competition in the gaming market. Its main rivals were Sega's Genesis, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the Panasonic 3DO, and the Atari Jaguar. Additionally, both Nintendo and Sony were developing new consoles, leaving consumers uncertain which platform to support. The Jaguar, released in 1993 for $250, was cheaper than the CD32, but failed to become popular, with only 57 games ever released. The Panasonic 3DO, also released in 1993, was much more expensive at $700, but proved more successful worldwide than the CD32 and Jaguar, eventually amassing a library of around 263 games. Commodore had ambitious plans to expand the CD32's reach to North America. The console was launched in Canada and Australia, with a US release planned for February 1994 at a price of $400. However, fate had other plans. Commodore owed the company CAD-Track $10 million in patent royalties for what was essentially the concept of a movable mouse cursor icon. A federal judge in the U.S. ordered an injunction against Commodore, preventing them from importing anything into the United States. Since the Amiga CD32 was manufactured in the Philippines, this effectively blocked the critical American launch that Commodore had been banking on to save their business. The situation worsened when the Philippine government seized all of the consoles intended for the U.S. market as payment for manufacturing costs. The factories were reportedly producing and shipping 22,000 machines to Europe every week, but the American units remained locked in limbo. A small number of CD32s made their way into the United States via mail order or by being shipped from Canada, but these were mere trickles compared to the flood Commodore needed. By April 29, 1994, just 8 months after the CD32's launch, Commodore International entered voluntary liquidation. The company was reportedly indebted to banks in 18 countries, owing over $50 million. Commodore Electronics, responsible for U.S. manufacturing and distribution, shut down completely. While the European and Canadian wings of the company remained operational for a time, they could not manufacture new consoles and soon followed the parent company into oblivion. Commodore UK attempted to buy out the American division, but their financial backing fell through, and they went into liquidation on August 30, 1995. In total, only around 100,000 CD32 consoles were ever sold in Europe. By comparison, the Atari Jaguar sold 250,000 units, the Panasonic 3DO sold 2 million, and the Sega Saturn reached 9.2 million. The Sony PlayStation would later eclipse them all with 102 million units sold worldwide. The CD32's failure was not solely due to Commodore's financial troubles. The console suffered from several inherent limitations that hampered its competitiveness in the rapidly evolving gaming landscape of the mid-1990s. The most significant issue was that the CD32 was essentially an Amiga 1200 computer repackaged as a console. This meant that most games were simply ports of existing Amiga titles, with few taking full advantage of the CD format's capabilities. Of the approximately 180 games released for the CD32, 107 made no use of the CD format at all. They were identical to their floppy disk counterparts. Only about 50 games featured CD audio, and a mere 17 included full-motion video cutscenes. The CD32's 2 megabytes of RAM created a bottleneck when trying to buffer high-resolution graphics and play CD-quality music simultaneously, limiting what developers could achieve. The minimal 1 kilobyte of onboard memory for save games was another significant drawback. This tiny allocation meant players could only save progress in one simple game at a time, with any new save overwriting the previous one. For more complex games like strategy titles, this was a deal-breaker. Microprose, for example, considered porting their popular Civilization game to the CD32, but abandoned the idea because the lack of save functionality made it impractical. Another factor limiting the CD32's appeal was its controller. While it featured multiple buttons, the D-pad's poor build quality made precision control difficult. Many games designed for the Amiga 1200 were optimized for mouse control and played poorly with the CD32's controller. Some games recognized this issue and supported mouse input, but this solution undermined the console's plug-and-play appeal. The CD32 also lacked any kind of copy protection, which wasn't an immediate problem in 1993, when CD technology itself served as a barrier to casual copying. However, had the console survived longer, this oversight would likely have become problematic as CD burners became more accessible. Despite these shortcomings, the CD32 wasn't without its merits. For developers willing to put in the effort, the hardware could deliver impressive experiences. Team 17, a standout developer for the platform, consistently went above and beyond when porting their games to the CD32. Their release of Alien Breed, Tower Assault, exemplified the potential of the system, featuring an extensive intro sequence, beautifully drawn sprites, and a new retreat move that allowed players to walk backward while firing. The game was vastly superior to its PC counterpart and came bundled with an AGA-enhanced version of Alien Breed 2. The horror continues. Other notable CD32 titles included Guardian, described by contemporary reviewers as Star Fox for the Amiga generation, which made excellent use of the CD32's joypad for its dynamic 3D shooting action. Flink, also known as The Misadventures of Flink, one of the few games developed specifically for the CD32, showcased what the system could do when developers fully embraced its capabilities. The game seamlessly blended RPG, beat-em-up, shooter, puzzle, and adventure elements, taking advantage of the CD format's storage capacity. Unfortunately, like many CD32 games, it suffered from the lack of a proper save function. The CD32 also received conversions of acclaimed Amiga point-and-click adventures like Beneath a Steel Sky and Simon the Sorcerer, which benefited greatly from the CD format's capacity for enhanced audio. Chris Barry's voiceover work for Simon was particularly praised, though his deep tones seemed incongruous for a character supposed to be 12 years old.
Goodbye, cruel world.
As 1994 progressed and the reality of Commodore's bankruptcy set in, the CD32 gradually faded from the gaming landscape. The final bundles were released in October 1994, but by then the console was effectively on life support. In April 1995, German PC maker Escom purchased Commodore's assets for $14 million, briefly hinting at plans to redesign and release the Amiga CD32 as a different unit. However, Escom itself went bankrupt on July 15, 1996, ending any hope of a CD32 revival. The console's demise coincided with the rise of true 3D gaming, an area where the CD32's AGA chipset couldn't compete with newer machines like the PlayStation. While the Amiga architecture had been revolutionary in the late 1980s, by the mid-1990s, it was struggling to keep pace with the rapidly evolving technological landscape. PC games using 3D graphics such as Doom and Wolfenstein 3D showcased the limitations of the Amiga platform. The legacy of the Amiga CD32 extends far beyond its brief commercial lifespan. While the console itself may have disappeared from store shelves by 1995, its impact continues to resonate in retro gaming circles and among Commodore enthusiasts. The CD32's fascinating combination of potential and missed opportunities has made it a sought-after collectible and an object of ongoing interest for the homebrew community. Today, the Amiga CD32 enjoys a second life through several avenues. Amiga OS is still maintained and updated by Hyperion Entertainment, which has released Amiga 1 computers based on PowerPC architecture. These modern machines can run many CD32 titles through emulation. The Amiga CD32 has developed a dedicated collecting community, with certain games reaching significant values that reflect their rarity and desirability. At the pinnacle of CD32 collecting sits The Final Gate, an FMV rail shooter set on a speedboat that was one of only 3 games exclusive to the platform. This rarity is reflected in its price tag. Complete in box, CIB copies regularly sell for around $550, while new sealed copies can command an astonishing $1,125. Similarly sought after is Fightin' Spirit, a well-regarded fighting game that sees CIB versions valued at approximately $382, with pristine sealed copies fetching up to $765. Brian the Lion, a challenging platformer released late in the console's lifecycle, now commands around $327 for CIB versions, with new copies reaching $654. Even licensed titles have gained significant value. The anime adaptation Akira now fetches about $155 for complete copies, while the strategy classic Battle Chess sees CIB versions selling for around $107. These prices reflect not only the game's quality but also their increasing scarcity as working CD32 units become harder to find. For collectors interested in the broader Amiga ecosystem, several games for the original Amiga computers have become exceptionally valuable. The extremely rare Amiga port of Castlevania has seen documented eBay sales exceeding $1,000, making it one of the most valuable Amiga games in existence. Early Amiga titles like Mindwalker can command up to $600 for new copies, while Sierra adventure games like King's Quest VI and Space Quest II: Vohal's Revenge have become premium collectibles valued at $670 and $300 respectively for sealed copies. Beyond software, the hardware itself has become increasingly collectible. Loose CD32 consoles typically sell for around $482, while complete in-box systems can reach $1,058, and new, unopened units, exceedingly rare given the console's commercial failure, can command up to $1,250. For collectors, several variants of the CD32 exist, adding another dimension to the hunt. The PAL model is relatively common and affordable, but the NTSC version, primarily consisting of units seized by the Philippine government, commands significantly higher prices. Perhaps the most elusive CD32-related collectible is the official MPEG FMV module. This expansion attached to the rear of the console and contained an MPEG decoder chipset from C-Cube, along with 1.5 megabytes of video RAM, allowing the CD32 to play video CDs and CD plus G releases. Demonstrated at the 1994 CeBIT show and priced at around £200, the module was produced in limited quantities by Commodore UK during the bankruptcy proceedings and is now extremely rare. Other valuable CD32 accessories include the official keyboard, various expansion modules like the SX1 and SX32, which effectively transform the CD32 into a full Amiga 1200 computer, and the Pro module. The market continues to evolve, with values generally trending upward as the system approaches its 30th anniversary, cementing its status as an interest piece of gaming history worthy of preservation. One fascinating aspect of the CD32's afterlife is how it found uses beyond gaming. Following Commodore's demise, the console was repurposed for various commercial and public applications. In 1993, 109 CD32 units were installed to run interactive exhibits at the London Transport Museum in Covent Garden, providing information, animations, and even a London Underground simulator in multiple languages. An Italian company called CD Express used the CD32 as the foundation for an arcade machine called Kubo CD32 in 1995. Connecting the console to an external circuit board that routed inputs and outputs through a standard JAMA connector used in arcade cabinets. Among gaming historians, the CD32 is recognized as an important transitional system that arrived at the crossroads between the 16-bit and 32-bit eras, and between cartridge and CD-based gaming. Its timing, just before the arrival of the PlayStation and Saturn, positions it as one of the last examples of the pre-3D gaming paradigm. The console's unique place in gaming history was aptly summarized by Byte magazine in August 1994, just months after Commodore's bankruptcy. Commodore's high point was the Amiga 1000. The Amiga was so far ahead of its time that almost nobody, including Commodore's marketing department, could fully articulate what it was all about. Today, it's obvious the Amiga was the first multimedia computer. Still, in those days, it was derided as a game machine because few people grasped the importance of advanced graphics, sound, and video. 9 years later, vendors are still struggling to make systems that work like 1985 Amigas. This sentiment applies equally well to the CD32, but it just came out too late. The CD32 may have been Commodore's last gasp, a desperate attempt to stave off bankruptcy with a product that couldn't save the company. Yet in its short existence, it managed to deliver some genuinely enjoyable gaming experiences, testing the boundaries of what was possible with the technology of the time. Thanks for joining me on this trip through the history of this legendary console. If there is any interesting gaming phenomena you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss more videos like this one. See you next time.